We'd just like to welcome everybody to the March session of the Ohio River Discussion Series. Today we're going to focus on lockhouses, and we have a little bit of, etiquette to do, and you just mute your phone, and if you want to disable your camera, please use the chat at all times. This is a active committee. We're looking for suggestions, ideas, questions. What our dream is that we're going to have a presentations, and then we'll deal with all the questions and comments afterwards. And this session's going to be recorded, and the video will be available. Next slide, please. And so we have a series of speakers today. I'm going to give an overview, and then we have Faith Walker, who's director of the Washington Westland Museum up there in Ravenswood, West Virginia, mile 216. And then Chris Klingman with the Claremont County Park District, mile 431, the Shiloh Visitor Center. Then Chris Lorenz with Thomas More at mile 451. Then Amanda Rogers with Lockhouse number 46 in English Park at mile 557. And then finishing up with Nathan Ryder down there in Main Street, Golconda. We'll have a little discussion around the Ohio River documentary, and then we're going to conclude with John from the University of Cincinnati, and he's an architect and is going to provide some final comments. Okay, next slide. Okay. Can everybody see my slide there? And so the bottom line is this Lockhouse group here is started from working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And we have a specific task to do to work with the Army Corps to think about renovating and, the existing ones, but also the vacant lockhouses up and down. So today is going to be hearing from, 5 of our lockhouses that are publicly used. It comes from the Ohio River Comprehensive Plan done by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the Ohio River Basin Alliance. Part of that group is we have 6 different working groups. This is really an initiative of the Recreation Working Group, but at the same time, we have healthy and productive ecosystems and abundant clean water and transportation and looking at the flood system and thinking about education and research. Once again, this is our charge. We're really to think about a network of these lockhouses. And there's 24 lockhouses, 12 of which have public access. 9 of the old lockhouses have public access, but the buildings are gone, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then there's 25 other lockhouses that, if we really want to think big, on tributaries to the river. These are our presenters today that we'll hear from in a minute. Just briefly, though, these lockhouses, started, some people say back in the early 1800s, right here in Louisville, Kentucky. And for many years, we had the McAlpin Lock and Dam here at the Falls of the Ohio. By the way, we have a wonderful Earth Day celebration coming up for that. But the Army Corps really focused on trying to open the channel. And we're focused on this period, 1879 to 1929. And that's when they built 52 of these facilities up and down the river to make the river manageable. Then for about 25 years or so, they had the flood control, and that's when they built all of the reservoirs. Then after World War II, we started with the modernization period, and that's where we are now. And so they built 20 locks and dams that replaced the 54 or 52 that we had later on. These 51 dams kept the river at a period of 9 feet deep. So it was a crucial piece for it. So as you can see, up and down the Ohio River, These are the locations of them. The blue ones are the current lock and dams, and so notice there's many more old ones than the new ones. You know, it starts way up in Pittsburgh, and these are just some photographs that I have of on my travels. Some of the lock houses are vacant, not used. This one here is a great example at River Mile 36.5. This lock house is totally surrounded by a park, sort of an industrial area, but it's for sale. Some of the lock houses are campgrounds. Some of the lock houses, as I said earlier, the buildings have been removed and they're public access sites. Some of the lock houses are in private hands. And this one actually is looking at becoming a bed and breakfast. Here's another site. You know, the interesting piece is almost all of them, they've left their steps up and down the area. You know, here's another vacant one in West Virginia. That's just, you know, heartbreak to me. It's just a beautiful structure. And here we have, you know, our speakers. And so this is Faith's building, and she'll show some better photographs of it. And then we'll have Chris talk about it with Chilo. And then another Chris with Thomas Moore. And then we go on down to Amanda down at Owensboro. And we're going to end up with Nathan talking a little bit about Golconda and their bed and breakfast that they have down there. And it's just a beautiful bed and breakfast. If you're looking for a place to stay, it's just a wonderful place to look at the river. I just wanted to end my piece with just saying, just imagine, you know, just imagine if we could have an access point, a interpretive center, a historical site, you know, every 20 miles almost on the river. It's just an incredible network. As I say here at the bottom, it could be the largest network of citizen science facilities in North America. We do have a committee that's behind us that's working with it. The Army Corps is actively involved, and so we just wanted to give a shout out for them. That's the end of my presentation. What I want to do is introduce Faith, who is up in West Virginia, and want you to share my screen and transfer it over to Faith. Faith, are you there? You're on mute, Faith.
Yes, here we go. I hope that you can all see me. Give it just a second. All right, hi guys. My name is Faith Walker. I am a Preservation Alliance of West Virginia AmeriCorps member, serving as the director of the Great Bend Museum for the city of Ravenswood, West Virginia. The Great Bend Museum is situated in former Lockhouse 22, which is between the current Belleville, West Virginia and Racine, Ohio dams. And the Lock 22 property is now Washington's Riverfront Park in Ravenswood. A little bit about us. Lock 22 was decommissioned in August 1969. It was built in 1918, decommissioned in August of 1969. And within a year, there were already discussions to turn the abandoned powerhouse into a county museum. You can see here, this is from 1970, and they're already making plans. And those plans came to fruition in August of 1972 when the Jackson County Historical Society founded what was then the Washington's Western Lands Museum. And they ran that for the next 48 years until they gave the museum to the city of Ravenswood in 2020. And it's currently run by the Board of Parks and Recreation, and under that, the Board of History and Culture. And our mission is to preserve, investigate, and inspire a curiosity in the stories of the Great Bend region, which is a very unique narrow bend in the Ohio River at Ravenswood. It's visible from the museum, and it has a lot of important historical and geographical significance in the region. There's a lot of benefits to using Lockhouse 22 as a museum. It's a historic structure with a really unusual history. Many of our visitors are from out of town who have absolutely no idea what the building was used for. Some have guessed a schoolhouse, some have guessed a warehouse, none have guessed powerhouse for the old lock and dam system that must have been here. So many are really interested in this story of the old wicket dams, which are really unique to the Ohio River, this lock and dam system and the story. And so it's a really great opportunity to just instantly engage visitors in the area's history. And I'm working on a large exhibit to tell that story. The museum has 3.5 floors, which is also very useful for various museum purposes. So the main floor, which is where this photo is taken, we had a school group come in last fall. That's the galleries. That's where the bulk of our collection is, and that's the public space. The basement is used for my office, collections management area, and a storage. And then there's also an upper floor, which is more of a loft. And it only takes up about 1/3 to 1/4 of the total building footprint. And it used to be exhibits, but now it's storage because it's too inaccessible for visitors. And then there's an attic above the loft, but that's not used anymore. So there's a ton of space, and each space can really easily be divided up into various museum needs. The building itself is really useful because it's constructed of concrete, brick, and steel, which is perfect for preservation because there's little to no chemical interaction between these materials and the collection like you find in other buildings. It's also very durable. The floors can support a lot of weight, unlike wood floors, and we avoided a lot of the problems of wood or other more delicate building constructions. In another one of our rooms, we have a Victorian hearse, like a huge horse-drawn, glass-cased vehicle. And we have no problem displaying that along with other very heavy objects in the collection. We also benefit from the large open spaces that the powerhouse provides. It's a very flexible gallery space for a variety of exhibits. It's very easy to navigate, and there's not much, unfortunately, there's not much wall space for hanging things. The windows do pose challenges, and unfortunately, the strength of our collection, we have a lot of cool photos and things that we'd like to hang, and that's unfortunately a weakness of the building, but it can be, it can be resolved. There's also a lot of original storage that we can take advantage of. There are cabinets upstairs, there are closets in the lockmaster's office, and most importantly, the lockmaster's map and blueprint drawers, which are still in his office. We use them for large document storage, and in fact, we found 5 lost blueprints under them last fall, which is a really wonderful addition to the collection. No one knew that they were there, and they've been hidden for the last 50 to 100 years. It's also useful to note that the building has had multiple purposes in the last 50 years, not just a museum. The Historical Society only rented the main floor and the loft for museum use, not the basement. And so the basement was used as a public gathering space for other purposes besides museum. It used to be a senior center, and then it was a parks and recreation event space. It's been retrofitted with a kitchen and a bathroom, and actually the Historical Society sealed the stairs between the basement and the main floor for security purposes, because the people going into the basement were not necessarily going to view the collection. So the building is really flexible and can have a lot of community purposes beyond just being used as a museum or something like that. Finally, I'd note that there are some issues that we're working on addressing with the building because they are all resolvable, but there are things that we are considering. It's not always accessible for everybody. There are very steep stairs to the main floor. And so we have plans to install an ADA lift probably later this summer. And then the building is really blessed with these large, beautiful windows, which give this incredible view of the park and the river and lots of natural light. And it's great for people and not great for the collection. And so we're working on covering the windows with UV resistant film. And we have plans to install blackout shades to block the light when the museum isn't open. So thinking more broadly, there are also a lot of benefits to using the Lock 22 property for a park more broadly. It's the city's most popular park because of the incredible views that it provides of the river. You can see this is one of them. The museum is located just out of sight right here. That's a tree that's in front of it. So there's always people walking, sitting, biking through. There are picnics, there's dog walking, there's games. It's very popular, and it's an incredible view and just really natural and beautiful. The park really capitalizes on the landscaping from Lock 22 as well. It's clear, flat land. It's very easy to navigate and build on. And yeah, it's fantastic for use as a park. It's also located right next to Interstate 77 and US Route 33. There's a major bridge that crosses maybe a quarter mile in this direction. It's a major roadway that passes through the area, and so we have visitors from Michigan to South Carolina who come to the park. In the last month alone, 30% of our visitor traffic was from out of town, and we're expecting way more of that over the summer. It's the first stop off of the highway, the park, and so people can like to stop and stretch their legs. There's a bathroom, and then they often stop by the museum while they're at it, just basically in passing. So the museum also really benefits from being in the park. It's also very centrally located. This road here is the road into the park. This is the museum. This is the Lockmaster's house. And this is the extent of the park as it exists now. So visiting the museum is one of many events and activities to participate in. There's also yoga, concerts, fishing tournaments, the Ohio River Festival. There are fundraisers for various campaigns and needs, and just all kinds of stuff. And so there's a lot of people who come to the park for those things and visit the museum as well, and vice versa. The museum and the park are also planned to be part of a much larger recreation complex that includes a marina, which is this here, and sports fields across the way, which are these here, and a big tourism push. The marina is actually what this drawing is for. It's been the city's big project for the past couple of years, and we have plans to start construction in the next couple months. It's very exciting. And the museum is being branded and marketed alongside it. The Great Bend Museum, we recently changed our name from Washington's Western Lands Museum to the Great Bend Museum. And then the marina is going to be called the Great Bend Marina. We'll have similar logos, signage, etc. And finally, the Lockmaster's house, our plans for that, unfortunately, it's essentially condemned, and the city plans to demolish it sometime soon. But they're planning to build an architecturally similar marina welcome center, and that'll be right here. And so again, the marina and the museum are planning to be basically side by side as a tourism pole in the area. And we're also planning on salvaging the materials from the Lockmaster's house for use on the museum. In particular, the roof tiles would be really, really valuable for repairing the museum roof, things like that. So I really have a twofold conclusion. First, the Lock building's size and unique architecture can make them really valuable spaces for arts and cultural institutions like museums. I mean, it's fantastic. From day one of working here, I was realizing how awesome using the former powerhouse as a museum is. It makes a lot of sense. And secondly, former Lock sites can be really wonderful locations for parks, and the buildings inside them can be integrated into larger entertainment and recreational activities. The Great Bend Museum is part of a larger parks and recreational complex, and it really benefits from that relationship. The park and the museum within it take advantage of the available landscape and structures of former Lock 22 in order to create thriving and unique community spaces, and I think that there's a lot of potential to easily do this elsewhere. Thank you.
Wow, Faith. Thank you very much, and what an exciting position you have as an AmeriCorps member. You know, it's just neat to see you getting involved in the history of the Ohio River and really placing emphasis on the relationship. It's just neat. Thank you very much. Once again, if people have comments or questions, please put them in the chat. We are going to have a period at the end of the time. And so type away. We're now going to move downstream to Chris with Chilo Lock 34. It's just an amazing museum if you haven't been there. They also have just a neat group campsite right there that if you have a Boy Scout troop, go explore Ohio River history. Chris, are you there?
I'm here. Good afternoon. This is a big story of Shiloh Lock 34 Park. There's a lot to talk about there, and I'm going to concentrate on just a couple of things that we've done over the last few years, actually the last 20 years, and just give you a taste for what what's going on there. And that the photo we see now is what it looks like today. But if we go back to 1929, it was a little different view then when the lock chamber was in operation and the powerhouse was being used to operate the lock and dam. Our powerhouse was completed in 1925. There was also 6 wood frame houses on the property, 2 brick houses, an 8-car garage, and a maintenance building and a paint shed. So there's a lot of structures there. This particular powerhouse is located about 3 miles upstream from the Meldal Dam, which affords us a benefit that most of the lock houses maybe don't have. Our pool level there at our site stays pretty consistent throughout the year. Of course, we do get high water here and there, but it takes a significant event to start raising the river level at the park, which makes a big difference with our boat ramp and boat docks. But the powerhouse was in operation from 1925 until 1964 when a boat hit the lock gate, knocking it off its track, and Meldal Dam, which is just downstream, was nearing completion, and so they'd never repaired the lock there at Shiloh, and they started using the one there at Meldal. The Park District acquired the property in 1985, and you can see the building was in fairly good shape for being abandoned for 20 years. A few windows were broken out, a few gutters had rusted through and things, but it was in fairly good shape. And we were able to secure a Federal Highway Administration National Scenic Byway grant in order to renovate the building. When we acquired the building from the Army Corps, it came with a set of deed restrictions since the property was eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Sites. And so we have to work with the State Historic Preservation Office on any of the improvements and things that we've made to the facilities there at the site. That grant was for about $785,000. As we worked with our architects and things to restore it, we realized that we were going to need about an additional $500,000 to complete the project. So when you go into the second floor of the building, this is what we found when we started. And that's the big water pump in the center there. On the right-hand side of that floor, there used to be a big air compressor. One of the unique things about Shiloh was that the lock doors and the bear traps in the dam were operated with air pressure instead of hydraulics in there. So it was kind of different that way. Up on the third floor of the building, there was 2 air tanks that held the compressed air. They took up a lot of space. They're about 20, each one was about 20 feet long, and if you stand next to them, the top of the tank is about 6 feet off the floor. Comprised all the air to open and close the gates. And one of the things we struggled with when we were looking at the renovation of the building was, what do we do with these tanks? How do we tell the story? And they take up so much space. So we ended up removing one of the tanks and cutting the second one in half in order to have more space for displays and things in the building. Down on the ground floor of the building, lots of lead paint hanging off the ceiling, an asbestos-covered boiler, the piping for the water pump that was on the second floor that feeds the water tower, some silt from a 1997 flood. Provided a few challenges as far as getting things cleaned up. But as we worked with got our plans together, That's that same spot as it is today. We put in an elevator, and that elevator had to go through the ceiling there on the first floor. That was a 30-inch concrete floor to support the machinery that was up on the second floor. And you noticed a lot of the conduits and things are all on the ceiling and on the walls. We're in the floodplain, and so in order to help protect the electrical systems and things, all that had to be run on the ceiling above the predicted flood stages and things that we might experience, which luckily we haven't experienced any since we renovated the building. But we had to put the elevator in for ADA accessibility, and so that provides access to all 3 floors. All the displays on the ground floor need to be movable in case of flooding and be able to move upstairs. All the HVAC equipment is located above the flood plain and the 100-year flood level. And then the elevator equipment is located up on the second floor as well. Second floor, we had interactive displays built. This one shows how a lock works along the river, and it's particular how the child lock work with roller gates on the dam or in the lock chamber versus the traditional lock gates that you see today. There's also a quarter scale model of a wicket dam that operates. It's interactive that people can use. And then we also have things like this where you can see what it would be like to be a diver that was working on the dam and had to work on replacing the nuts and bolts and things underwater. Kids enjoy that. Up on the third floor, we have been able to put a lot of different displays in. We've recently been donated some models of steamboats that plied the waters through our area. There's a steamboat whistle display that was put together with the help of the sons and daughters of the pioneer rivermen. We recreated a old steamboat pilot house so that the kids can look out the window and feel like they're piloting a steamboat. We're currently working on a display on Captain Ernie Wagner, who was a Claremont County resident who was the longtime captain of the Delta Queen. We also recently received a scale model of the Delta Queen that we're going to get out on display as well in there. But we wanted to connect people to the river, and we also had to not only renovate the building, but the outside of the building was a challenge as well. Our river was screened off by a 6-foot-high chain link fence with barbed wire on top of it, and many days when the vegetation would grow, you could be in the park and not even be able to see the river. The river was one of the main natural features of the park and a great attraction, and so we wanted people to be able to see that. So we created a open view from the park and made it a much more enjoyable place for people to come and see the river and enjoy the river. Part of the building renovation was to put observation decks on the downstream side of the building in this plaza area for people to be able to come and overlook the river. And yes, that's our steps leading down to the river right there. And people obviously come and enjoy that site. You can see the river or the museum from the river. You can see the observation decks on the side there. They actually come out beyond the edge of the building, so you can see up and down the river from the decks there. And then the assistant lockmaster house is still standing. We're using that for offices and storage, different things that we've been donated but not yet ready for display.
Chris, you have about a minute left.
Okay. The other big project we did was connecting people to the river through a boat ramp. Years ago, we had this small plastic dock that we anchored with 2 parking blocks into the river. We used the old road that went down to the dam as the actual ramp, which was kind of narrow. And then ODNR wanted us to, or gave us a grant from the Cooperative Boating Access Program to build a 2-lane boat ramp, 60-car parking lot there on the river, and also provided 200 feet of courtesy dock in there, and that provides access for people who are on the river. They can also come and visit the museum and use the park. And that ramp is extremely popular with not only power boaters, but also kayakers and canoers who like to paddle upriver to our Cricket Run State Nature Preserve and paddle around in the backwater in those areas. So the whole project just described was about $2.1 million that was spent on things there. But funding was from the Federal Highway Administration National Scenic Byway program. That program still exists, but they haven't had any grant funding since 2012. Division of Watercraft's Cooperative Boating Facility Grant is still available through ODNR. Park districts can receive funding through ODOT for Metro Parks Road Fund. We had to build a new entrance road to the park. Pattison Foundation is a foundation that helps the park district, and all those help contribute to funding the renovation of the museum and the boat ramp area. And I'd be happy to share the bigger story with anybody. If they want to come and visit, I will be at that facility most of the summer, and glad to show people around, tell the whole story.
Chris, thank you very much. It's just an exciting place to visit, and it's, you know, you're right. You know, that little, I've launched my kayak there several times and have paddled up into your nature preserve. It's just a wonderful combination. It's just a pure pleasure. Thank you very much. We're gonna move on to Chris Lorenz, and I'm gonna operate his slides. And can you see this, Chris?
Yes, thank you, David.
Just save.
So yep, all good. So as David mentioned, I'm Chris Lorenz with Thomas More University. I'd like to thank Harry Stone with ORBA for sponsoring this whole event, as well as Jen Bowman, who's the chair of our Knowledge for Informed Decisions working group with ORBA, as well as Nick and Adam at Orsenko, and of course David Wicks, who's really spearheading this whole Lockhouse renovation project along with others, and is privileged to be a part of it. I also like to thank Faith and Chris, our previous presenters, and appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Thomas More Field Station. Next slide.
Good.
And our field station was US Lock and Dam 35, so just downstream of Chris Klingman's up in 34. We're at River Mile 451, which is upstream about 18 miles from Cincinnati. We're located on the Kentucky shore in California, Kentucky, and you can see a picture of our Lockhouse there on the far right. Ours was built in 1919, and this picture is from 1925 when the lock and dam was still operational. Next slide. And then an overview of our facilities. We have about 13 acres at our field station, and David, you'll click through a series of facilities. So we have houses up on the hill. We have the lodge next to that. Down on the river, we have a boathouse. Our lock house is now our lab building. We have a K through 12 STEM outreach center, a pavilion, and then off the screen we have a constructed wetlands and an interpretive nature trail. Next slide. And the field station programs entail these three categories or umbrellas: the undergraduate research programs, university courses, and a K through 12 STEM outreach program. So we acquired the site in 1967 from the federal government after the dam was decommissioned, and we entered what's called a 30-year quitclaim deed. So the federal government and Thomas More University shared the property for the first 30 years. And during that time, next slide, we really operated up on the hill. We didn't use the Lockhouse down on the river. Next slide. But we started a field station from these humble beginnings, and we turned the houses that the workers used to live in when it was a lock and dam facility into dorms for students, into a lab, and for staff housing as well. Next slide. And then in 1997 was a significant event in our history. It was a grant to renovate the former Lockhouse into a lab facility, and we had much of the same challenges that Chris spoke about in terms of working with the former. But over those 2 years, next slide, we renovated the Lockhouse or powerhouse into a biological laboratory. We have 3 labs, a water quality lab where we work with source water protection of the Ohio River with the drinking water authorities. And we also raise groups of endangered and threatened species, mussels, hellbenders, fish in particular. Next slide. And this lab is used for our signature program, which is undergraduate research internships. So each summer we bring 12 to 16 undergraduate students from around the country to live at the field station, work in the lab that you can see in the background, and to conduct research on the river. And then up on the hill, we built a education conference center. This is our second capital project on site. Next slide. And what we did was we took 2 of the old houses, 2 of the former houses that were associated with the lock and dam facility, and connected them into our LEED certified building. Next slide, which we call the lodge. And the lodge has in it bedrooms so you can stay overnight, meeting space, kitchen, living area as well. Next slide. And the lodge really brought a whole new audience besides the scientists to our field station. It's become a community and university resource. So a lot of the academic departments, sports teams, students clubs, and others use the facility, including private parties. We'll be hosting David Witz's group, who plans to have a long canoe trip along the Ohio River, making stops along the way. And we're able to host them for a night in the lodge. And then our third and final capital project at our location was our K-12 STEM Outreach Center. So as this program grew, we needed to create some more space. So we took an old maintenance shed, next slide, took it down, and in its place, we built the STEM Center. Next slide, and the STEM Center is located at the same footprint along the river next to the old powerhouse or lockhouse. When we built the STEM Center, we added a river mirror on the side for a couple reasons. A, it's just aesthetically a nice piece to the station. Secondly, it's used for education when we bring the K-12 students out. And then lastly, it really blends the arts and sciences together. We know that in some ways artists can exemplify or display or educate us in a unique way. So we like that art presence at our field station. Next slide. And the STEM Center is a high-tech, smart classroom. It can seat 75 people. It allows us to do distance learning, but also, of course, host a lot of groups in person, whether it's our K-12 groups. We teach university courses in the building, have open houses, scientific conferences, and external groups that can utilize the facility. Next slide. Some other facilities at our field station, we built an outdoor classroom next to the STEM Center. We built a maintenance shed / boathouse, a mile-long interpretive trail for folks to be able to go down along the river, and then a constructed wetland which treats all of our wastewater on site, as well as some beehives. And then lastly, the houses. The houses were originally a part of this lock and dam facility where the workers lived. We then now use them for students, faculty, staff, and visitors. And it's the housing piece that creates this community of like-minded individuals who have an interest in the river, research in the river, and those houses are really an integral part. And we're really now into the next phase that's germane to this webinar. We want to create greater public access, so maybe build some campsites, improve our boat launch. And then this last point, I want to emphasize the networking with other lock houses. So to be able to work with Chris, work with Faith, work with these other lock houses really allows us to expand our research potential along the river so that we can coordinate our efforts together, whether it's through sensors or just communication. And so this project has a lot of value inherently in each of the sites, but I think equal value in being able to connect the whole network of lock houses up and down the river will really transform our ability not just to recreate on the river, but to understand and appreciate the river. So I look forward to answering any questions at the end, and thanks again for this opportunity.
Let me I think it's, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. What a pleasure it is to hear your presentation. And if you haven't been to the Thomas More facility, I would highly recommend it. It is just an amazing spot to get inspired by young people. You know, who cares about us old professors? But when you really interact with those young people who spend a whole summer on the river, it's just a classic opportunity. So check out Thomas More, and thank you, Chris. And once again, make sure you put any comments and discussion items into the chat. We're moving downriver, but below Louisville now, down to Owensboro, Kentucky, and we have Miss Amanda Rogers on the phone or on the piece, and you're called up, Amanda.
Awesome. Thanks, David. I appreciate you all having me today. After watching the previous 3 presentations, I feel like our community is a little behind the 8 ball here on what we've done with our lock and dam building. But in my job here as Director of Parks and Recreation for the city, I have a unique history with that building. When I began with the city, that lock and dam building was actually our Parks and Recreation office. So my first job full-time with the city and my office was there in the basement of that building. But on that first slide, David, if you don't mind to go back to kind of see where we're located, we think of ourselves here in Owensboro as far as the Ohio River as almost being kind of halfway in between the Paducah down to our southwest and Louisville to our northeast. So we're kind of in the middle, and we're in a river bend there as well. So next, David. When you look at began operations in 1925, built in 25, began operations in 26, and it stayed operable until about 75. At that time, the Army Corps of Engineers had developed the Newburgh High Dam, and that's when they closed our dam here in 75. And shortly thereafter, the city took a short-term lease with the Army Corps for recreational use of that property, and then did a quick claim deed, as Chris had mentioned before, for that property to do no less than a 25-year lease for that location with some recreational restrictions. So when you look at what's unique to me as someone here who is from the Davis County, Kentucky area, is when you really look hard at the Ohio River and even that lock building. I included a picture, an aerial overhead of the Google map. It's really unique to look at how our community grew from that river. The further out you get from the condensed metropolitan area, the more farmland you see. So you can really see that here in Owensboro, we really are condensed with the river capulating us at the north there as we spread our population a little bit south, east, and west. Next. So I found a couple of older pictures of our lock and dam building. That building there, you could see we had a basement, a main floor, and a half floor attic in our building. And the picture to the left is a good overview picture, an older picture of what that river wall and that property looked like back in the late 20s. If you'll move on to the next, David. There's a picture that at our public access room at our Davis County Public Library here of the development of that lock and dam building there to the right, and a picture of some working river boats there on the left from many years back. David, if you'll go again to the next slide. Currently, the river wall, the lock wall is still, the river wall is still behind our property. We still have the tie-off buoys there. We do see steamboats that travel up and down the Ohio River that make stop for multiple days at a time here in Owensboro. We work through the Parks and Rec Department to provide them with water, sanitation access, and other things for when they stop for their day trips there at the river. And other than that, our lock and dam building is basically set within what we call English Park. So the lockmaster for about 16 years was a gentleman by the name of Peter English, and they named the park after that lockmaster. Outside of the lock operations building, there are no other lock and dam buildings on our property at the current time. All the rest of those have been torn down. There's about 8 acres of parkland around that space, some of which has been sold, and that is one of the larger parks in our system for just general park and public use access here in Owensboro, Kentucky. When they developed that park in the mid 70s and early 80s, they added a 3,500 seat amphitheater that is on that river bank wall that faces out over the river. We have a large pavilion that seats about 300 at the top of the river. And here in Owensboro, we kind of think as the river as the heart of our community in a lot of ways. And we have a lot of groups, not-for-profits, and a lot of fundraising activities that take place on our riverfront. And English Park was the primary location for all of those activities up until about 2012. In 2010, our community developed a riverfront master plan. And in that master plan, they determined they would develop another location in our park system that we call Smothers Park and create a larger riverfront park. Now, the goal of our master plan is to connect English Park and Smothers Park together via an over river walkway. Thus far, we have developed Smothers Park and opened that location. We added about 3 acres of property out over the river, literally made space at the river to be able to develop a large community gathering space. And it's been super successful. So we've seen less use of English Park over the last few years, but it's our community's hope to continue to develop that riverfront connection. And right now we're working with a group to look at a larger transient boat dock, either at English or at the Smothers Park area, and hoping to have some decision about how to move that project forward in the next several years. We're also looking at other ways to utilize that building for economic development or improvements in our community. So do we create better accessibility? I know everyone that's operating one of those buildings now understands the accessibility issue that comes with that lock and dam operation house. So we are struggling with costs associated with developing that to be a more accessible location. We have had a local developer reach out to us and inquire and come and tour the building for potential use for a restaurant, which I found quite interesting when I thought about all the things they would have to overcome to make that accessible for the general public and to operate a restaurant out of it. But we've got someone looking at that location, wanting to do something in partnership with the city. So right now here in Owensboro, we're kind of in a unique situation because we're gathering information, trying to make decisions about the future of that location and how it ties together with Smothers Park for the development of our riverfront here in Owensboro.
Well, Amanda, it's just amazing. And if folks on the call haven't been down to Owensboro, you know, it really ties downtown Owensboro to the river, and it's just a new park and English Park. And, you know, that's what we hope this committee can do, is not only help think about funds for restoration of the building, and a restaurant would be fascinating. You know, there is a restaurant operating out of one of the Lockhouses up by Pittsburgh. And so maybe we could link the two of those.
Yeah.
All sorts of possibilities.
Yeah. And I will say English Park is still heavily trafficked, especially in nice weather. It is the location for our boat access for our local boaters and our emergency access point for the river. We do several, as I'm sure most communities along the river do. We do 2 or 3 very large events. We have an air show that's been every year. We're moving to an every other year because of an expense that has access point over the river. So English Park and Smothers Park are your primary locations to watch that air show where the planes fly over our river and over our bridge, which is quite unique. We had hydroplane boat races this year, back from when we used to do those in the late 70s and early 80s, which was really exciting for a lot of the people in the community that could remember those from years back. We are having those again this upcoming year. And then we have no less than 28 to 35 events a year that occur on our riverfront. We process about 70 public event applications. And then every weekend that the weather's nice, typically that early April through October, we've got some kind of happening on our riverfront. And a lot of those do tie in between Smothers and English, especially if it's a river access event.
That's just so exciting. That's just so exciting. And if there's, we look forward to working with you. We have to move along. Is Nathan online from Golconda? Nathan, are you there? Maybe you could de-share the screen there, Adam. And is someone from Golconda online? Well, we'd like to move along and something just happened. There we go. And we have our next presenter. We were going to talk about Golconda, who has turned it into a bed and breakfast right downstream. Well, there's Newburgh, and then Golconda almost all the way to the Mississippi River. And unfortunately, Nathan's not around, but if you haven't been on it, it's just wonderful. If you could, Nathan or Adam, send it on over to Jonathan, who's going to put some final comments on the day, and then we'll certainly have some discussions. Jonathan, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. And thank you to our presenters, Faith, Chris C., Chris L., and Amanda. My name is John Stoughton. I'm an architect here based in Cincinnati. My role here in the presentation is really just to kind of summarize and facilitate some questions. So I'll talk just for a minute here, but if you have a question, if you think of a question based on these past presentations, please use the chat and I'll do my best to facilitate. And just to summarize and to kind of zoom out, if you will, this is a map of our current lock and dam network that if you were to go out and drive the river today, these are the sites that currently exist. But the sites we're talking about, as David and so many others have illustrated, are actually these. And you can see just how much more potential sites there are along the river than currently exist. So these are all the historic lock and dam sites. Some of them still have buildings and some of them have been demolished or repurposed. And just to situate where the pictures that you saw in the presentation today were, these are where all of our speakers are situated. So you can see where Faith, Chris Klingman, Chris Lorenz, and Amanda sit along the river. And there's quite a large stretch of space between each site. So the big question on my mind, and I think on many of our minds, is what do we do, right? What do we do with the rest of these sites? What is the potential for maybe thinking about a broader network of these places? So, each of the presenters shared a really amazing kind of master plan, so to speak, for their kind of campus, their Lockhouse campus. We heard, Chris from Thomas More talking about taking more of a campus kind of or community-based approach in incorporating not only the old powerhouse, but also the lockmaster houses into his thinking of how to reuse his lockhouse. And we heard from Amanda thinking about kind of gathering information and thinking kind of about future plans and kind of starting to reimagine possible uses for their lockhouse in Owensboro. And then also, I thought Faith, who kicked things off, had a really insightful look at how their lockhouse participates in kind of a broader tourism package for their town. And completely out of order, but Chris C. at Shiloh really talked about the logistics behind kind of renovating their lockhouse, from dealing with lead and asbestos to dealing with the floodplain and situating building systems above the floodplain and trying to deal with accessibility. So really, really amazing group of speakers. I would say that the only other thing I wanted to mention was in David's intro, he quickly mentioned that, you know, this has the potential to become what we're calling the largest network of citizen science facilities in North America. So while each of these presenters has their own kind of master plan for their immediate Lockhouse, we can think even broadly or bigger picture about this nearly 1,000-mile long river and how we might all be a little bit more connected than we appear to be in real life, where we're all kind of dealing with the same design problems, but we're all kind of stretched out along the river. So really great to hear from everyone today. I love seeing this image and kind of ending with this historical image because it kind of shows how things popped up here along the river, where these little mini power stations were kind of off on their own and isolated in the landscape with a few lockmaster houses. So certainly things have developed since then, but it's quite interesting to look back at these photos. So, you know, I don't know if who all from our presenters is still on. I did want to just ask a quick question.
Jonathan,
Yeah,
Jonathan,
go ahead.
Nathan has just joined us from Golconda.
Fantastic.
They're on Midwestern time, but Nathan, are you there? And maybe if
Yeah, let's shift it over to Nathan.
I am. I'm sorry. I am unfortunately on Midwestern time, and I screwed this up and didn't realize we were on Eastern time. So I apologize for that.
well, it's our fault. And do you have a short PowerPoint, or do you just want to talk a little bit? You missed the 4 other presentations, but we have a couple minutes and would love to sort of hear your thoughts about Golconda.
Sure. I'd be happy to share my screen real quick. If you want to allow me to share my screen, I'll just let everybody see what we've got going on at the Golconda Lockmaster Homes. But we were lucky enough with our nonprofit organization to be able to partner with the city to restore the 4 Lockmaster homes that sit on the site, former site of Lock and Dam 51 that was located at Golconda, Illinois. Unfortunately, the lock is long gone. It was decommissioned in 1980 by the Army Corps of Engineers. And from that point, the site just kind of sat in a state of disuse and disrepair. The city came to an agreement with the Army Corps in the late 80s to allow the city to utilize the buildings that were located on the site. So that included the Lockmaster homes, and then also the old pump house and power building that was located where the lock was. And there's a couple other outbuildings associated with the site that are still there to this day. But basically, our nonprofit organization went through the process of restoring those homes, and in February 2002, we leased them out to Dam 51 LLC, which is a limited liability corporation that works with us to actually run and maintain those homes. So we now currently have the 4 Lockmaster cottages, which are available for lease to guests who are staying. It's on Airbnb, so if anybody is looking for a unique stay, you can stay in one of the 4 Lockmaster cottages. We have taken lots of time to restore and maintain the original interior woodwork. You can see a lot of the features like the fireplace, the mantles, a lot of the light fixtures are original light fixtures. And so we have had really great response. They've been rented and available for people to stay in for quite some time, but we just put them on Airbnb this past year and have had a huge outpouring of folks who have been looking for a unique place to stay, and right on the riverfront, I might add. They all have these beautiful screened-in porches that overlook the Ohio River and the sites, you know, that used to be there with the Lock and Dam. We're a small team of volunteers that lovingly maintain these homes and keep them up so people can stay in them. It takes a lot of work, as you can imagine, but I think it pays off. We're hoping that we can further expand the offerings of the Lock and Dam site, potentially into the old pump house building, which is quite remarkable. It still has some of the old cast iron equipment sitting in it, but we can see lots of different uses for the space, including a museum that would highlight the locks and dams that used to be up and down the Ohio River, along with possibly a brewery or some type of a coffee shop where people could really sit and take in that river view that you get from the site there here in Golconda. So I'll keep it short and sweet since I was late, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask.
You know, I have to say, I have stayed down there for a couple nights, and it's just wonderful. And downtown Golconda just has some great restaurants. And one of the interesting pieces in Diver Dan, the owners was born there in one of these lock houses, and she just has great stories that her dad was lockmaster. And just, you know, it's a wonderful town right downstream from Cave in Rock State Park. Makes a great visit. Thank you very much, Nathan. Jonathan, are there any questions or any other thoughts? You know, I do have one, and that is maybe for Chris and Chris Lorenz. Could you just talk briefly? You know, we had 5 lock houses in different sections of the Ohio River. You know, and could you just, in a minute, talk about the geography of the Ohio River from an ecological point of view? Does the river really change? You know, does the riparian area, you know, are there similarities or are there differences?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, the river starts in Pittsburgh, goes all the way down to Cairo, Illinois, 981 miles long. And in many ways, the populations up and down the river are similar. But when you look a little closer, you see really 3 distinct ecoregions. You see the upper, middle, and lower regions that have different fish populations, different communities based upon the topography. We're much steeper or narrower upstream. We're intermediate in the midsections, and then downstream, it's a much more wide, slower moving river. And so we have these 3 distinct ecoregions. Furthermore, with the modern locks and dams, we have 20 pools, and they have their own unique characteristics. So that's why it's really important to study the river on a river-wide perspective, because A, there's differences, and B, that water flows through all of our communities, so they're going to affect one versus the other. So having these lock houses to serve as a network brings a lot of value from a scientific perspective. We also know it has a great community development aspect, tourism aspect, and of course, recreation aspect. But from an ecological standpoint, looking at the river from the beginning to end is really a lot of value this could bring.
You know, we haven't really talked much about the U.S. Army Corps, who built all of these, and it's their historic legacy that we're working with. And the interesting part to me is they're very interested in, you know, the public relations, the recreational access to it, but they don't own most of them. And so working with the Corps is a little bit of a challenge, but any thoughts on successful Corps initiatives that might help create a network like this? Is it possible to create a network of 1 lock house per pool that is really engaged in public access? Just an open-ended question. Well, with that open-ended question, it's 1:02. I wish to thank everybody for their presentations. Faith, you just did a great job, and Chris, you know, you've been with it since the beginning, and it's just so exciting to see that work go on at Chilo, and Chris Lorenz. I think it's just fascinating, the ecological outreach and the commitment to community. And Amanda, with your, you know, experience of working with parks and being based in one of the lock houses, what an amazing story. And Nathan, just that successful work on there. There's one other person who might still be online, Morgan Atkinson. Are you still there? Anyway, I don't hear Morgan anymore, but I did post a video in the chat. Morgan is developing an Ohio River documentary with Orba and with the Ohio River Recreation Trail and with River City Paddle Sports. And we're going to feature the Lockhouses in a variety of ways. And so I guess he's not there. Is there anything else for the good of the order? John, do you want to chime in at the end?
No, I don't have anything else, David. I thought it was really insightful to hear all these different reuse case studies from along the river. So, and actually quite fitting that Nathan hopped in on a different time zone just to kind of reiterate how long the river is. So
that's it. Multiple time zones, and it's my fault, Nathan. I'm sorry, but this was recorded, and we will post this on the web. And please feel free to share this with a variety of folks. There is, with the Ohio River Basin Alliance, a conference coming up in the fall, and we'll have another report about the Lockhouses coming up. And the Ohio River Basin Alliance Conference is going to be at Thomas More. And not to put you on the spot again, Chris, but could you give a short commercial for this Ohio River Basin conference coming up?
Are you talking about the Alliance Orba Summit?
Yeah.
Yeah, we just hosted that in the fall of 2021, and in 2022 it will be at Marshall University. And keep an eye on Orba's newsletter or Sanko and lots of other outlets to get more information about the river.
Thank you. I thought of it, so it's at Marshall, up closer to you, Faith. Well, once again, many thanks to Orsenko for hosting this. And there is a session planned for mid-May, focusing on the Ohio River Clean Sweep and the other public events around floats during the month of June. And so stay tuned. And once again, thank you very much, Orsenko, and thank you for all your presenters.
Thank you, David.
Take care. Thank you very much, and we're finished.
Thanks, David. Goodbye.
Hi, Jen. Jen, do you have any comments here? I should have looked to see if you were online. I should have had you.
No, that's fine. It was a great presentation.